and that would be, and there will be a lot of nice and big buildings built around those prospects. So what we now see in Moscow, as for example Tverskaya Street, is that we have these bigger prospects built, and if you go inside, if you walk inside, then you can still see the old initial Moscow. But looking at the next one, looking at this picture, you can identify what the ambition was. The ambition was to show that the Soviet capital and the new Soviet capital is basically not what the Tsarist Russia was before, and the church is not the highest building in the city anymore. And then at the time there was a plan to build these 7 big skyscrapers, let's say, which in a way represent kind of modern Soviet churches, and the biggest one with being the one with topped with Lenin. And move to the next one. Next one. There's the size comparison of what was there and what was planned. And the next one. Well, actually, we all know and how it feels and what was done. The Moscow that was in 1930s, well, let's say a small size city, was turned into a capital of the Soviet Union, with a number of these big gestures. Next one. So a number of big prospects, a number of big landmarks, and overscaled buildings. And if you move to the next one, I hope it works as a movie. Does it? No? No? Okay. Doesn't? Why not? You don't have a player?
It's like an image.
Strange.
Because it's Liberals, I think.
Okay, then you watch it the next time. There's a very interesting movie that's called Moscow, New Moscow from 1938, and which was how big the ambition was and what was the whole outcome of this reconstruction of Moscow at the time. Okay, then we move to the next one. We don't have the movie.
Okay. Shall I continue?
Yes.
Yeah. So the next, I think, quite important reason for cities to come into being was simply administrative reasons. Here we see an example of a typical administrative city in the Roman Empire. Next one. But that was actually the case not just in the Roman Empire, but also basically in all other cultures that existed at the time, whatever, 2,000 years ago, up to, I would say, today. Next one. Here you see actually a sort of diagram of like the ideal city in China. It's still the basis of any kind of feng shui rule, but what it actually shows is that basically what it requires was a river, mountains in the back, river basically in the front, and the city delineated as a square with a wall around, which actually was at the sole purpose of helping to administer the, at that time, already quite large Chinese state, if you want. Next one. And what you can see is those cities, Chinese systematized how these cities actually were organized, and even defined pretty detailed measures as to how long the size of each square should be, and how these actually squares relate to each other, because very often you have basically concentric squares. So you started with a smaller one, and then as the city grew, the walls were basically became bigger and bigger, but always based on a square. And you still can see this in many cities in China. Next one. Here you see the sort of layout of Chang'an, which is now Xi'an, the old capital of the Tang Dynasty, the first real capital of China, which exactly has this kind of square grid. Again, like in the Roman Empire, with administrative centers, with in a way leisure places, with a palace complex, with markets. So everything basically a city needed to operate. Next one. And this is Xi'an, Chang'an of the ancient times today. What you still can see is that this pattern still exists. So you still have the sort of main axis, you still have the ancient city wall, you still have the different quarters in a sort of rectangular or square format. And in these Chinese cities, this was not just used to organize the city, but also to organize society. So basically all quarters were gated communities. At nighttime, the doors were closed and nobody was allowed to be outside on the street. And what it shows is, one is there was enormous power of a ruler, and then secondly also shows that there was a class which was busy with kind of organizing the state in all its details, in all its dimensions. And this is, in a way, probably one of the reasons why China is, in a way, the oldest country that in this form still exists, because they very early on established a class of civil servants which were literate, which could write, and by having those skills, in a way, could communicate with each other and could communicate, orders that came from a central power. They're called mandarins, and becoming a mandarin was a very, very difficult test you had to pass. So you did not only have to write and read, but you also had to know a lot about ideology, philosophy, etc., etc. And that simply made sure that these people who were in these functions were all aligned with one single idea that was given centrally. And interestingly, the Chinese state, to a very, very large extent, still nowadays functions according to this principle. And Chinese cities nowadays still look not so different from what was planned back then, in terms of basic underlying principles. Next one. Here we see a picture of Aigues-Mortes, which is a city in the south of France, in the Camargue. That city was built for one single purpose, and there was a harbor city from where the boats or the crusades to the Holy Land went. But that's another story. What's, I think, really interesting about this shows that how important walls have become at some point in time. And in a way, already in Roman times, but especially in the Middle Ages, the walls in a way were the devices that defined what is city and what is countryside. Next one. It all started off with fortification, making fortresses, and people actually did not live necessarily in these fortresses, but they lived next to them. So whenever there was a threat, they basically could get inside the fortresses, behind the walls, and somehow were protected. Next one. This also, in Babylon, the walls, as Yana explained earlier, had an important function as dividing the sacred from the kind of non-sacred places. But it also, of course, developed sort of a sort of military dimension, which then next one. made the people next to fencing or walling off sacred places, made them walling off areas, residential areas, temple grounds, areas where, let's say, classes and services of a certain importance were located. Often this was then also combined, not only having walls, but also having water around to provide another layer of security. Next one. Here you can see it in a sort of more 3D version how this was organized.
Basically, if we think of the cities at the time, each city represented a state as well. Like if we talk about Mesopotamia, or later on even in medieval times, each city was a city-state. So they had to fight, let's say, between them. It was not like the whole big nation, but each city had to be protected from whatever the forces coming from the outside. So each city was in a way self-contained and self-dependent.
And they were of course collaborating with each other. Some were collaborating, some were enemies. But at that time they didn't have GPS and radar systems which showed every single movement. So you could easily get in front of the walls of Babylon probably without anybody else kind of realizing and being able to take action on time. Where are we now? Can you take the next one? So this is another example of a walled city, and it's actually a sort of it's in Erbil. Erbil is in Iraq, and it's one of the oldest cities in the world which is still inhabited. And then I'm talking about this kind of egg-shaped plateau we have there. What they have there is they have walls which double as buildings. So basically they are buildings, but they have a very kind of solid wall facing the outside with very little windows. And the whole city was located on a sort of on a plateau which is raised from the rest of the area, which made it more difficult to conquer, but it also allowed to see who is actually coming across the plains surrounding it and being able to take action on time. Next one. Yana, do you want to do this? Yana?
About the medieval city.
Yes.
Also, if we think of a city as a place where people could hide in case of war, and if we think of a city as basically the magnet that worked with the entire region, because quite often the city had a dependent region on it. So there were still a lot of people at the time living in the countryside and producing the food and all other supplies. And then the city served as a kind of a nucleus where people would meet. So it had this protective wall, but there was also a number of other elements. It had a castle that served as an administrative center, and it had a market where people could exchange things. And it had a number of neighborhoods of the people that had different professions that could do other things apart from agriculture. And that's just talking in general about the medieval city and how it came about. So the wall and the protection and that military function was quite essential to that city. And if we move to the next one, and if we remember the previous picture about the one we've seen before, that there is a castle and that the castle generates that activity around it, that such as market and such as other people, different professions coming around it. Then that's Krakow. And that's the castle of Krakow. And then if we move to the next one, we see that the castle appeared initially on the hilltop. And then the whole city basically grew later around the square that was a trade square, and then later on the wall came to protect that whole thing together with the castle. And just generally talking about the walls, in the medieval times where cities were all self-dependent, they all had a wall, and that wall became such a strong and essential element that later on, go to the next one, the city in Palvanova, that the wall the wall served for military purpose and for the purpose of installing. How is that in this case?
Okay.
Markus, do you know what kind of?
Sorry, once more? I couldn't hear you.
I cannot hear exactly. Well, so they had to establish a special defense system. In this case, they had, I guess, guns. Yeah, the gun system. That at some point introduced over the planning of this system. And the way the military protection became the most important thing that shaped the form of the city. In this case, in Villanova, it's just an over-exaggerated example of how the city was planned in according to serve the best way of its protection. So that all the soldiers could run as fast to the walls, and all the provision, all the storages of how is it called? The bullets and all the stuff could be kept around the walls. And that's, if you move to the next one, this is the city as it exists right now. Still walled. And okay, we move to the next one, the Russian case.
Next one.
Next one. Design. Next one. Alex. Yeah. So the same thing had happened in Russian cities. Actually, before there were cities and protections, the people settled around.
I think she's gone now.
Hello?
Hello? Yeah. Back.
Well, so in the next coming pictures, there's a three pictures of design developing in the 11th and 12th century. You can move on. So basically, there was a small wooden fortress that then got bigger, and it offered protection for the surrounding villages. And then it got even bigger. Just move to the next one, and included some. Yeah. Okay, not Moscow. But the whole story about the cities being serving as a protection. In case of Ryazan, on one hand, they say that in all the Russian cities, the city started first, and they didn't even have a ruler at the time. And then, well, as a small fortress. And then there is like the Russian myth that the citizen of the city would go and ask somebody to get there and to become the ruler of the city. So if you've seen in the previous cities that usually there was a strong political leadership, in case of the smaller Russian older cities, they say it was the opposite way around. So in a way it was organically grown as the need to be protected, and then as soon as they needed to grow to structure and to make it work, then they established the administrative system for it. And basically in case of Moscow, if you move to the Moscow plan, that's the same thing that happened. The wall was a necessary element of the city, but then first it included this black thing. First it was just a small thing where they would have they would have a ruler of the city living, they would have a couple of churches. But then as the city grew, they would have more and more neighborhoods that they would need to include within the wall. So in case of Moscow had this 1, 2, 3, 4 times that they built a different new wall around the city. So and that's still visible in the planning of the city as we know it now. So the next one, yeah, just an image of what it was. So if you see this image, then you can tell that what's inside the wall is a city, and what's outside is already a countryside. Well, the next is an example of Brest. What's the story of military city purposes is twofold. On one hand, there are the cities that themselves become such military units and that they themselves protect themselves by the walls. Another thing is that as soon as we have a bigger country or a bigger empire that starts spreading to different territories, then there is a number of places that appear just for military reasons. And in case of Brest, that's how Brest looked before it became the part of the Russian Empire. So it was a city, let's say, somehow organically grown on the intersection between the two rivers. And when, well, it was at the time, I guess, the area of the Dutch of Lithuania. And then the next one, oops, is that, yeah. Okay, I move to the next one then, with the Brest. Next one. Next one.
Yeah, the right hand. Yeah?
So what happened is that did you want to talk about the previous one?
No, I'll do that.
No, it's just, it's just to show what happened to the city when the military need was more than the local population need or whatever. So the Russian Empire established the fortress there, and then if you move to the next one, so they, next one? Next one, yeah. So basically what they did, this one. So what they did is they completely removed the whole historical city from its initial core and moved it over here to the east. And that's where all the city dwellers were removed. And the place that was better for the military purpose was built as a pure fortress. And that's where basically the Russian Empire started. That was the fortress of the Russian Empire at the time. And you know the story of Brest fortress as it was used later on in the Second World War and so on.
That was the previous image.
And if you move to the next one.
No, that was the previous you were talking about. But there's now St. Petersburg actually. That was the one, no? She's gone, actually. Anna? Yes. Can you quickly go back, Alex, to the picture of this star-shaped? No, the previous one? Yeah, this one. That kind of should come a bit earlier. But anyway, I just wanted to extend a bit on this kind of military importance and the change in military, because what you see here is on one is the face of let's say probably the most successful fortress builder, city builder in his period, which is Sébastien de Bourbon, who built a lot of fortresses around the borders of France to basically protect France. On the picture you see Neuf-Brisach, which is on the border to Germany, and it's again a sort of like Italian example we saw, a sort of almost kind of ideal military city. Now, why was this necessary? This was simply necessary because, up till about 1500, simply the weapons that were available didn't have such a far reach. So a wall could basically do the job, but as soon as cannons were invented and used in Europe, that really had an enormous repercussion on how big this layer of protection actually needed to be around these cities. And I think now you can go to the St. Petersburg picture, because that shows it quite well.
This one?
Yes. Yana, do you want to continue?
No, well, what I wanted to say is that initially when St. Petersburg, can you hear me? When St. Petersburg was planned, so this is the plan from 1717, so the first plan that they did for St. Petersburg, they planned it as a proper fortress, let's say. So that time the understanding is that the city has to be kept within these protective walls. which we know that never actually happened, because at the time when they started construction, the walls lost their initial need, their initial they were not necessary anymore from the military purposes.
Yeah. But I mean,
still, like going through. Oh, next one.
Oh, but briefly going to. I mean, we're working on part of a similar kind of fortification, but which was much bigger. Actually, Kronstadt and all these fortresses are part of the same kind of ideology of basically building these kind of mini fortresses, you could say, at the outskirts of a city, basically also to provide a sort of something that stops any kind of enemy trying to attack the city as early as possible. How is it done? Yana, do you continue? Yana?
No, well, it's just that, yeah, I can hear you. There's not much that I want to say about it, just that there were a lot of fortresses built around Russia, and actually a lot of cities that we know now have started as this kind of perfect fortresses, as Markus explained also. As you see in the case of Orенburg, which was built first just as a pure fortress. And if we move on to the next one, where we have this lots of little fortresses.
Yeah.
The building of fortresses was also an accessory when a country started to grow. And in case of Russia, this happened when they started to conquer Siberia, for example. And here is a number of cities that they built at the time, and you can see they're all very typical. So you have a fortress, and you have another kind of dependent city next to it. And also you can see that in a way it's a also the typical construction started at the time already.
Prototypes.
Okay, next one.
Yeah, I think another reason, and that came actually was in a way a lesson learned from a lot of diseases which swept Europe in the medieval times that basically killed almost half of the population of the entire continent, was that planning was used to improve sanitary reasons. Here you see a picture of a settlement in Dessau in Germany, which was done by the modernists, which in a way modernism was an attempt to make cities more sanitary. Are they happy?
Yeah, this picture.
Yeah.
No, but not before. We did not have it before. Now go back to the previous page, Alex.
Beautiful. To make cities, to have sanitary improvements in cities. So there was this motto of light, air, and sun, which in a way was a response to the cities that had emerged during the sort of early capitalism and industrialization. Next one. Even though I think he's mostly known as somebody who is famous for establishing the big boulevards in Paris, which often are read as simply a demonstration of power. That was not really the case, because Haussmann did not only have, and this is what you see here, George Haussmann, did not only have the agenda to, in a way, beautify the city, make it more monumental and more sort of capital of France, but also to improve the pretty bad sanitary condition, and on top of that, also have routes that allow the military to move more quickly through the city to keep potential resistance and problems in check. So there were a whole amalgamation of aspects, but I think one of the most important ones was not so much the power demonstration, but actually the sanitary aspect, because Paris at the time was simply a place where I think nobody of us would ever want to live. I think a slum is a nice description of what that, or a good description of what that was. Next one. Here you see a drawing of like living conditions at the time of Haussmann. This is an apartment for one family. If you see the dimensions, it's about 3 meters wide and 4 meters deep. And it houses some, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people in that space, including furniture, including all kinds of things. This is a report, a drawing of a report the British government commissioned. But you can assume that these kind of living conditions were actually only present in all of the cities in the middle to the later half of the 19th century. So overcrowded, of very bad sanitary condition, no tap water, coal heating, if there was any heating, no bathroom or whatsoever. Toilets basically also did not exist. So a very bad thing, and Haussmann actually tried to help that. Next one. Here you basically see a plan of the interventions he was planning for the center of Paris. So through the existing urban fabric, he proposed a series of axes, boulevards, big streets, which connected places of a certain importance that existed already in the city, or they were newly established. Next one. Here you see the system that was basically implemented. Next one. And here you can see how these interventions actually changed the urban fabric of the city. This is a sort of before and after picture of the kind of the same condition. Just kind of cutting new boulevards like the Avenue de l'Opéra straight through existing urban fabric. Next one. Here is a sort of zoom in of that condition, and you can see how much of Paris was basically erased at the time. And what is interesting, if you look at a city plan of the day of Paris, you can read in which kind of places they established the boulevards, because what they did is they left all the areas behind it more or less unchanged, so only the facades on the boulevards were modified. Next one. Here's a sort of pictures, a sort of before and after picture. There's one. You take the next one. There's another. And what you can see is that simply the image and the architectural language and scale of the urban fabric and of the streets completely changed how Paris was perceived. Basically, this intervention propelled a medieval city, one of the oldest cities in Europe, into the 19th century, and I think it was one of the reasons why Paris became such an important place in the first couple of decades of the 20th century. That simply was a city which was more modern, which was more developed than many other places, particularly in Europe. Next one. Here, this is quite a famous architect, which you probably all know, Le Corbusier. And I just wanted to come back to this approach of Haussmann, because essentially Le Corbusier advocated, but probably much more radically, a similar kind of approach. It was about, the old city was evil, the old city was tight, the old city was unhealthy, and it had to be replaced by new ideology, a new city, and this is what actually made modernism come into being. Simply this on an urban scale, simply this idea of we have to make healthier cities, and all the conclusions they drew from that. So separation of different functions in the city, actually making cities much more green than they were before. dissolving this very tight street pattern. And I mean, it's been a very, very powerful and kind of ideologically quite successful model, which we can still see all over the world. And I mean, if you get back to the Russian context, the idea of the microrayon is also very much rooted in this kind of ideology, this kind of idea of city. Next one. Another, I think, quite important reason is economic reasons, because cities very quickly became economic centers. There were political centers where the ruler was located. There was basically the power, there was the religious power, but also the economic power tried to be there, and it also made sense to use cities for economic reasons, because they gather people, because they were at the nodes of transport and flows of goods. They became the perfect marketplaces for exchange. You want to continue, Yana? Yana?
No, you just going again. Historically, the cities quite often appear in places where the trade routes would cross. So if we go back to the ancient Greece, you can see that all their cities were basically ports where trade happened. And if you go to the next one, we go back to Milet. Next one. So the city that we've seen before as and Crete was also a place with a number of identical elements that make up the city, and one of them was this square where trade happened. So you could go from the port to what in Greece was called agora. It was on one point a social square, but also the place of interchange. Place of interchange of goods, but also interchange of knowledge, since a lot of people would come to the cities, and the cities were places where people would meet. If you go to the next one, it's just the example of how it manifests itself in space. In the agora in Greece. And the next one. So if we look at the plan of Athens, we see that at the time there was the Acropolis, that was the important sacred place, the important temple place, and that introduces one power that existed in the city. But almost of the same size and almost of the same importance, we have this agora that was the social and trade center of the city. And if you go to the next one, it just shows what kind of activities appeared around that trade area and around that meeting area. Just the next one. Yeah, the next one is just talking about the same two centers that the cities quite often had. One being linked to the centralized power, or the power of religion, and the other more of this economic power that the cities always needed to survive. And again, we look at the next one. Next one. And again, we look at the medieval city, and what we see there is, the next one. Yeah. I don't think I have a good connection. Sometimes I don't hear you. So the medieval city, what it represented, it's the same thing we see in Athens in a way. We have something that represents a more of a top-down power, and on the other hand, we have a market square that conveys the power of masses, and that we know. And again, this one, that we know that marketplaces became very, very thriving places in every city, and the cities could also charge for the people who came outside to this market. So that was also the way the cities made money on these markets. And that's also where the first building representing more the power of the city, like the Rathaus appeared. And if we move to the next one, and see that the same story actually happened in Russian cities, that they also had a number of quite big squares allocated for trade, such as the Red Square. Historically, in Russian cities, the squares for trade were allocated outside of the city wall, because the city was more built for the protection. It was more of a fortress. But later on, when they built another set of walls, also this trading activity was included inside of the city. Next one. Just a real picture of the Red Square at some point, which was used just as a hive market. Next one. Well, just the next picture is another Russian city.